So I was thinking back on my own childhood and on childhood in general. And what's kind of interesting is that when I think back on the things I liked when I was a young kid, a lot of it was kind of the opposite of what I like now, or the beliefs I held were in many ways kind of the opposite. For instance, I was actually in love with suburbia. Like, it's kind of like when Bilbo says about Frodo, like, oh, he's still in love with the Shire. Like, I was still in love with suburbia. In fact, I loved it so much that I had my dad drive me around to like new housing developments because I was so obsessed with like looking at them and looking at the floor plans and stuff like that. I mean, granted, that's a kind of an autism thing, but nevertheless, I mean, it's interesting how much my preferences have changed in that regard because now I talk constantly about how suburbia is hideous, dystopian, cookie cutter ugliness. And even when it came to movies, like, I thought Die Another Day was the best James Bond movie. I thought Wild Wild West was all right. Yeah, or I even thought Battlefield Earth was like, okay, it's just okay. It's just average, you know? Like my tastes in movies had very low standards and I was very easily wowed by like anything flashy, anything like that's like flashy and goes boom. Like I thought Attack of the Clones when it came out was like the best Star Wars movie. Um so yeah, I mean, and I hated kind of like I wasn't really into like drama films of any time, any kind, anything that was like, not full of flashy explosions or whatever. And even when it came to food, I loved Goy Slop. I loved junk food. Like I loved fast food chains and, just kind of like sweets from the grocery store, like mass produced junk food. And I always wanted to go to the chains. I didn't want to go to like local restaurants. I specifically wanted to go to the mega chains and I wanted to try all the mega chains. And I was also really obsessed with malls. Like I had a mall phase where I just wanted to visit every mall in the greater Toronto area and I had my dad take me to these places. And I mean, the more I think about it, when I was a kid, I was really the polar opposite of how I am now. Like, the faker the better was kind of how I liked things. Like, I was really into anything goy slop, anything junk food in the literal or figurative sense of the word. Like, the more mass produced, the more fake, the better. And it's really interesting how I guess somewhere, I'd say roughly between the ages of 12 and 25 was when I kind of evolved into my current tastes and preferences from everything to and everything from like movies, TV, video games, books, music to food and architecture and like the types of places I like to go, like when traveling or that I like to live in. And it's just very interesting thinking about that. And I think this is kind of the reason why I just don't think society should be built around the preferences of children. I really don't. Like, I think kids are important because we need the next generation. Like, obviously, we need more people. Like, even if the world is overpopulated, we still need there to be people in the future. So I'm not trying to say that I'm like anti-children, but what I'm trying to say is that like I really don't think the preferences of children should dictate the norms of society. And the more I think about it, when I think about like what I call Murica, like well, it's not just what I call Murica, like Murica. Like when I think about like Las Vegas is basically Disneyland for grown-ups, and it's kind of for like people who never outgrew that childish mentality. Like I kind of feel that that's what those sort of places are like. And I kind of feel like Murica as a whole is a society that's kind of based around the preferences of children, whether it be literal children or adults who are essentially in their mentality overgrown children, like people who like flashy fake things essentially. I think Dubai is also like that, and many parts of the Persian Gulf, which is I've talked about this before. How like that's the one other part of the world that is more American than America is the Arab oil countries around the Persian Gulf. But yeah, I guess that's kind of my point. Is like I kind of feel like children, whether it be literal children or just adults who have never outgrown the childish mentality, they always have a tendency toward things that are fake, flashy, and tacky and mass produced, kind of like literal and figurative junk food, goy slop. And I think that's just one thing we have to keep in mind is that, like, even as a child, like, maybe in some way going to all these suburban housing developments was my brain's way of urging me onward toward becoming more interested in architecture. And maybe in some ways it was part of a process that led to me becoming interested in historic architecture. But nonetheless, the way my brain processed it at the time when I was like 7, 8, 9 years old, it was just a very immature and juvenile version of the type of interest I have now. You know, like being obsessed with suburban McMansions and cookie cutter houses rather than being interested in like historic, beautiful architecture. And I think it is a bit like the lyrics in the song Lateralis by Tool. Like, black and white are all I see in my infancy. Red and yellow then came to be reaching out to me. I kind of feel that's really how it is. Like, as kids, we tend to like stuff like McDonald's. And then many of us, as we get older, we discover, hey, there's other hamburgers out there that taste a lot better, often from local restaurants. And again, some people never outgrow that mentality, the childish preference for fast food, junk food, goy slop, whether again, figuratively or literally. Like, and I just think that's one thing we have to keep in mind, because I think some people, they want to just base everything around the preferences of children because their idea is we have to just encourage a higher birth rate no matter what. But it's like, I don't think everything should be based around the preferences of children. I think children don't have great taste. I think, generally speaking, adults have better taste than children do. Like, children just have a preference for mass-produced crap. I did as a child. Almost every other child that I knew did, aside from like one or two people who were just exceptionally precocious and like mature for their age. But like, generally speaking, and I was in the gifted program, like even my peers, we still had this like the same childish junk food, fast food, goy slop type preferences. Again, figuratively and literally. So like, I guess that's kind of my point. My point here is that like, yeah, kids are important, but we should not base all of society around their preferences. And again, to go in more detail about myself here, like some of the things I like, I think I didn't really develop a taste for until I was far older. Like when I think about like, I never really got into reading nonfiction that much until I was like 24 or 25. And even I was into travel much younger, but I think I was very much into just doing what a lot of tourists do, which is just going to see the attractions themselves, like the landmarks, the museums. But I didn't really get into like wandering the back streets, which is where I think you can really see a lot of the beautiful architecture. I didn't really get into that style of traveling until I was like maybe 24. And same with like hiking in like wilderness and stuff. I didn't get into that until like 23 or 24. So, and even with food, I would say like I had a preference for like goy slop up until maybe like somewhere between, like 24 and 25 when I started, I think, preferring local restaurants over like mega chains. And I mean, even with television shows, I didn't really get into stuff like Breaking Bad or The Sopranos or The Wire until I was like maybe, I don't know, 20, 21. So I guess my point is, like, I mean, our preferences do evolve over time. They haven't evolved that much for me, I'd say, since 25 or so. I'd say they've been more or less set in stone through, like, since then. Although I think my political views have changed since then, but not so much like my preferences in terms of like media or architecture or art or food or anything like that. Although I will say one thing that I will say, I hated modernist art always. Like, even when I was a young kid, the first time I went to the Art Gallery of Ontario, My least favorite part of the museum was always the modernist art, and I always made fun of it, and I thought it was shitty. Especially like the paintings were just black or white, like one color on the entire canvas. So yeah, I mean honestly, like yeah, fair enough. Like our tastes evolve over time, and society as a whole should not revolve around the tastes of children. That's kind of my children in the literal sense, or in the sense of like adults who act and think like overgrown children. So, yeah, that's kind of my point there.